Right?
All right. Hello, everyone. We should just be connecting to audio here. Welcome to what the heck is today? Today is
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Okay. So we're on day 7 of our Black Friday event, which I'm pretty sure I called that yesterday, day 7, and it would certainly not have been. That would have been day 6. So glad to have you guys here. If you are already tuned in, oh, wow. Already have some hellos coming in. I will share this for you guys. Let's see. Everyone drop a hello for Ryan in the chat, please. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Holly had said, well, you guys were having a whole conversation here beforehand, which is great. So, Ryan, the way that this works is like it's a stream on YouTube that says that it's coming soon. So technically, you can comment on it, weeks in advance if you wanted to, if it was out long enough. So it looks like they had some conversation. Beth had said, "Hi, I'm excited to finally be able to listen to a live from start to finish." Bethany, you could not have picked a better one, and I mean that quite seriously because this is the beginning of our case studies. And I'll introduce you guys to Ryan properly in just a second, but you will find out rapidly here why he is a great person to have started with. Holly said, "Yay, Beth! I had to join late a few days too. At least we're able to go back and see what we." Yes, you guys picked awesome ones to be here. Holly, glad to see you again. If you guys are very shy today, that's fine. We normally get a 30 to 60-second delay, but I would have expected some hellos by now. So let them drop in the chat, please. This is going to be fun, guys. So we are entering now the case studies section of all of this stuff that we're doing for Black Friday. If you do not know yet, we're doing the biggest Black Friday sale that we have ever done in FDN history. And it's also the longest because we started on November 10th. We're like most places that typically do it for 3 days or 4 days, starts on Black Friday, ends on Cyber Monday. And then I don't know about you guys. I said this a few times throughout the Discovery Series that we've been doing over the last week and a half. And Ryan, maybe you feel the same way because you wouldn't have heard this yet. Do you feel like the last several years, I don't know if it was COVID, I don't know if it's the move to online or whatever's causing this. Do you remember the time that doesn't seem too long ago when Black Friday was like a 1 or 2 day thing? And now it's like companies, November 1st, it's like I'm doing my Black Friday sale. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I even see companies sending me emails at the beginning of November saying they're doing like a pre-Black Friday sale or something like that.
It's so funny. I'm like, I
Yeah.
know now I can basically start in the beginning of the month of November, saving up or buying for whatever or buying whatever I want because it's like every company I know of is starting so early. So we took that approach this year. We said if we can't beat them, let's join them. That sale with $2,000 off started on the 10th and will be good until the end of the day on December 1st. Now, the point of this whole discovery series for you guys over this last week and a half and for the next week and change is all about discovering FDN for free. We genuinely believe that we actually know this because this is why we do these events. We know that there are people out there that are waiting for something like this. They're waiting for a program like this. And if they were to have it presented to them, they'd be like, oh, great. This is what I wanted. Thank you for showing me. And they're happy to buy it. And we consider that a great way to do our sales and marketing. We're big believers that you shouldn't have to hide your sales or marketing process in any business. Otherwise, you're probably doing something wrong. Maybe you should double check what you're doing if you feel that way about your sales and marketing process. So we say, what a great way. What a blessing that we have. We can just share our information for free. And we give you the replays for free. You don't have to pay for them for this event. So they're instantly available the second that we're done on our YouTube channel. And then you get to make an informed decision. And you also get to be introduced to other wonderful practitioners and services throughout the month. I just think that's an awesome way to do it. I think we're very lucky to be in a position where we can do that and not have to be a little gimmicky or whatever. So Ryan is a business partner of mine, just so you guys know. You've probably heard me mention him a few times throughout this whole event. So we do have a company together called the Autoimmune Recovery Lab. He is not here necessarily representing that today directly. He does have his own practice. He also has something. Well, I'll read this in the formal bio and then I explain why today is such a perfect day for you to be on because this is coincidence that something happened yesterday, but this is huge news for what he has. So if you are a trainee or graduate, especially, your ears are going to perk up a little bit with this one. So I will share it with you guys in just a second here. All right, Ryan Monahan is an FDN practitioner, nationally board certified health coach, certified AIP coach, founder of the Functional Fast Track, which is one-on-one mentorship to master advanced functional lab testing, and co-founder of the Autoimmune Recovery Lab. So I said with the thing I was wanted to mention more about is Functional Fast Track. So this is specifically for people who would have probably graduated something like FDN or already had gone through some advanced training or at least foundational training. And then you get into our graduate group or you get into this group and it's the Wild West. You're like, wait, how do I do an organic acids test? What about the mold testing out there? What about this? How do I do all of this stuff? That is what Ryan created his functional fast track for. So he'll touch more on that at the end. That's not what this is all about. This is about the case study first. And then if you guys realize, wait, this dude's pretty smart, I might want to learn from him more, then we do have something that you can see at the end. And the reason that today is a special day, totally coincidence. This is just like perfect alignment. So yesterday he just met with our COO and CPO, and they have officially approved Functional Fast Track as an FDN approved course. So this means that this is directly recommended by our company. And it's not a course, really. It's a one-on-one mentorship, excuse me. But the Functional Fast Track is directly recommended now by FDN. This is something that we consider to be useful to all of our graduates. And it's got that FDN stamp of approval, which, of course, doesn't directly mean anything like legally or whatever, but what we're saying is there's only so many things that we do put our names on and recommend, and this is one of them. So it was obviously very well deserved. I'm not surprised by any means. It's just very cool that happened to happen yesterday. Furthering the bio here, he has a passion for uncovering hidden stressors that contribute to thyroid disease. Throughout his journey, Ryan spent over 10 frustrating years visiting more than 40 health professionals to find answers to his chronic health conditions until being diagnosed with Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disease, for those that don't know, in 2012. Since then, his mission has been to change the dialogue about chronic disease towards a holistic, functional approach while helping others restore their health to normal function. Typically, his clients are people who have struggled with finding relief from their autoimmune symptoms. Oftentimes, they feel they've tried everything and that traditional medicine hasn't served them. In his experience, there is a better way. Just always so cool to have you on these things, Ryan. It's been fun seeing the progression too of our friendship, because this started out with, I remember years ago now, I mean, at least 6 or 7, Ryan was a clinical advisor here, a very, very respected clinical advisor, and then got so busy with his own practice, he did end up moving on to his own thing. But he was also on what was called at the time our Fantastic Friday calls. So nowadays, we have 2 of those basically. We have one for the trainees in the trainee group. We have one for the graduates in the graduate group. But back then, it's funny because it's not like it was that long ago. Just people weren't using Zoom as much. So we all had to call in on this little phone, and you'd get into the switchboard, and Brandon Mole and Brendan Vermeyer and Ryan would let you in. And you got to ask these guys questions about what we could do with our protocols and things like that. And I remember us just talking back then, and we always got along. And then we started meeting each other at conferences. And then it was, hey, dude, do you want to split an Airbnb? And then it turned into an awesome friendship that's now a business relationship. Ryan and his partner have been nice enough to have me actually out at their house in Colorado. And they are just as awesome in person as they are online. So I hope that's a good enough bio, my friend. I got the real one and the makeshift one. Welcome to our Discovery Series for this Black Friday.
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. And I'm so glad that we have met and have been able to partner. And that's often how these things go, right? When we join in community, especially with like-minded people, because we're a special breed, right? FDNs, we think different. We really do think differently. And going to some of these conferences and getting to share Airbnbs with fellow FDNs, it's always ends up being the highlight of my year. Just to be able to, we pick each other's brains and we get to talk the same language. It's a really amazing thing. And so,
awesome.
Yeah.
See a lot of excitement for you in the chat. Some people already know you, which is great. Again, for the grads and trainees, this is what's so much fun about the case studies, guys. These case studies are designed for everyone. If you're not an FDN, you literally get to see what FDN is today. If you are a trainee, you get to be inspired about what you're going to do. And if you're a grad, you are learning from someone. Guys, I can't stress this enough because Ryan's way too humble. And thankfully, I have enough ego for the both of us. I'm kidding. Well, kind of. It depends on the day. Ryan is someone like, imagine you go through FDN and how much you know after that. And now you become the person at your family parties or whatever. You could talk the talk, man. You know a lot about this stuff. Mm-hmm. Ryan's like that, except he never stopped learning. So he just keeps going through things, keeps reading books, keeps going to conferences. And now, when did you graduate from FDN?
Actually, I'm glad you asked. In January will be my 10-year anniversary of graduating from the FDN program. So I started in 2015 and I graduated at the very beginning of 2016. So I'm coming up close on my 10-year anniversary.
That's awesome. So even precedes me here at FDN. And it's like, guys, it's just been, and he was already learning about some health stuff before, but it's just been a decade, a fourth of your life solely dedicated to studying this stuff, getting more and more information. And you know what? Sifting through a lot of the crud. because there's a lot of things out there that just aren't useful that a lot of people share. So you're learning from someone today that actually does it, has worked with, correct me if I'm wrong about the number, I assume it has to be thousands of clients directly and indirectly at this point, correct?
Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
It's insane.
Yeah. Yes.
Can't even imagine how many clinical consults you've done for practitioners. So this is someone that's actually doing it, actually getting results consistently, has had a real business doing it for years. So make sure you take some notes today. Remember, the replays are instantly available after we are done live, which is so cool about the Black Friday sessions. It is free. You guys will not be charged for it. But still, you're here live today. Pay attention. We'll get into the presentation, and we will have some time for Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to remove the chat just from the main screen. Of course, you can
Sure.
still see it on the side. Really, really glad to have everyone here. We also have Jenna with us. She's going to be in the background. You won't see her on video, but if you do have questions as we're going through here about the course or about anything we're doing this week, hey, Ev, what's the link to this thing? We will be here in the chat helping out with that. But we are going to get Ryan's screen shared here and get it tested, see what's going on with him. And then once he's done, again, we'll have time for Q&A. Don't ask Jenna and I the questions that you would ask Ryan. Like, that's above our pay grade, man. You just save those. But you can ask the questions as we go along. We'll star them, and then we can go back at the end. So even if we're 10 minutes in, you can still ask Ryan a question. Not going to be answered instantly, but we will be able to go back to that for him at the end. And Ryan, I will bring in your screen share here.
All right.
Are you seeing it yourself? It looks good?
I see it on my end, and
Perfect.
going back and forth there. Is that looking good?
No, everything looks great. I am.
Okay,
Oh,
cool.
well, no, I did not see your slides moving back and forth actually yet. So,
No?
yeah, okay, that's good. That's good.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I'm going to
Sure.
remove myself. It's like last time we were on Restream. Remember, I'm here 100% of the time. I just don't like to be distracting while you're presenting. So we're here with you, and good luck, my friend. I'm looking forward to seeing what you got.
Well, thanks so much, Evan, for that amazing introduction. And thanks so much, everyone, for being here, for taking time out from your very busy schedules to be here with me today. I'm sure, Evan, like you mentioned, there's a good mix of trainees and graduates and prospects too, people that are interested in becoming a functional health coach or becoming an FDNP specifically. And I have nothing but good things to say about the program for what it's worth. Like we just talked about, I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary. This has been my sole gig for a decade of my life, which is crazy to think about how many opportunities that this path has given me. Just even, meeting some of my very best friends like Evan, the ability to work from home, to make a good living and to make an impact all at the same time. So it may sound cheesy to say, but I do mean this, that I owe my life to FDN and to Reed Davis for creating the program. And I'm happy to answer any questions about it too, if we have time, and if it's relevant. So, all right, guys, this is going to be fun. This was a very recent case study that I had the opportunity to review just last week. This was not my own client. This was for another FDN practitioner, a friend of mine who I occasionally do some lab reviews with. And so this is part of the work that I do in addition to the one-on-one work that I'm doing with my clients, is I also do clinical advising on the side. And I also do direct mentorship for other FDN practitioners through Functional Fast Track, which we'll talk about towards the end. Okay, so again, this was a lab I reviewed less than a week ago. And I thought some of the connections between the labs was so neat and tidy, sort of. You'll see what I mean as we go through this, that I wanted the opportunity to share this with you guys, because this is how I want you all to think as practitioners. I want you to be able to identify these patterns and to see how different lab patterns are interrelated from, say, a GI map to blood chemistry to an organic acid test. And today, I'm actually sort of hearkening back to my days doing the quick and nerdy program that I started around 2020, 2021 for AFDNP, where the idea was to go into one very specific topic and going deeper than wide. And so that's exactly what we're going to do today. So we're going to see this relationship between the thyroid, between iron levels, and how what's happening with the thyroid and iron levels might provide us with clues as to what might be going on with the gut and how all these things are sort of intertwined. Because after all, I like to say that we are one body, right? Last time I checked, right? We're not just a bunch of separate parts and pieces. Everything in the body is interconnected. All of these systems are interconnected. And you need to start thinking about it that way. We can't be looking at these different problems in isolation. There are no problems in isolation. One thing we'll talk about, for example, is that thyroid dysfunction is a whole body problem. Thyroid problems are not a thyroid problem. They're not in the slightest. It might manifest at the end of the chain as a thyroid problem, but ultimately something as specific as a thyroid problem is in reality a whole body problem. I hope that makes sense. So moving along here, now this client's name was not actually Marla, but I decided to name her Marla. That's just the first thing that came to my mind. I'm not exactly sure why, but just to protect the client's identity here. But everything else here is 100% true about this case. So Marla, as I'm calling her, is a 68-year-old female. So that would put her in the menopausal age bracket. And her number one goal was to fix her gut. So in her own words, she had been struggling with gut-related health challenges for 20 years, which is an awfully long time. More specifically, those gut challenges included abdominal discomfort and burning, and occasionally dealing with slightly loose bowels. Now, interesting to note, we're all about diet and lifestyle. So she has been, at least up until the time we did this review, she has been drinking alcohol, eating gluten, and eating dairy, including ice cream after dinner time. So some of these things, I think you guys are seeing where this might be headed already. Some of these things are going to have to go. Has high work-related stress, but no stress management tools, at least that she had reported. So no ways of coping with that stress or managing it. Prior diagnoses, plural, included a Hashimoto's diagnosis. So that's kind of right up my alley, right? Many of you know I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's in 2012 and have since been able to put that condition into remission. Endometriosis, which is also typically described as an autoimmune condition, if not an autoimmune condition outright, at least autoimmune tangential or autoimmune-like in nature, and arthritis, which can have an autoimmune component as well. Whether we call it autoimmunity or generalized inflammatory states or conditions in the body, either way, we're still dealing with metabolic chaos at the end of the day. These conditions are just labels, and they're an entry point to uncovering the underlying triggers or root causes or stressors that are perpetuating them. So I wrote here, working in her favor, things that she's doing well that are working in her favor would include cardio 3 to 4 times a week, has great friends and family support, and says that her work gives her purpose. So that's fantastic, right? With that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at, we're going to just jump right in the fire. I hope this is okay, guys. We're going to look at her actual thyroid panel as it was reported from LabCorp. Okay, so I highlighted or circled a couple key findings here, one of which is the TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, some of you may know this, some of you may not, so it may be worth sharing this information and repeating that TSH is indirectly related to thyroid hormone production. When I say indirectly, what I mean is that the higher your TSH goes, typically the lower we'll see the thyroid hormones. And the ideal, or what we like to call the optimal range for TSH, would be about 0.5 to a 2.0, maybe a 2.5, somewhere in that range. So 0.5 to, we'll say, up to 2.5. So a 4.28 would be considered pretty high in my book. What's interesting, as I noted below, is that these values were not flagged on the blood chemistry printout from LabCorp. All right. So you would have to know this information and be able to spot it. You have to have a good practitioner eye, because the lab is not going to flag that TSH as being high until it goes above a 4.5 or a 5, which he's actually pretty close to. Okay. So why is this? Well, when we're looking at these ranges from LabCorp, we know that we're looking at large population data. And I like to say that these ranges are reactive rather than proactive. They're really diagnostic in nature. Like, so it's almost as though what these lab ranges are communicating is that until this value goes above that range, we're not going to diagnose you with, we're not going to release that insurance code or diagnose you with a condition. So you can be right on the edge of a lab reference range, and the doctor is unlikely to say anything at all, right? So 4.28 is considered quote unquote normal from a conventional perspective, when I would make the argument that it's far from optimal. Not only do we see that the TSH at a 4.28, which is above a 0.5 to a 2.5, about twice above that range. At the same time here, the free T3, which, let me pause to clarify here, this thyroid hormone is so profound that I call it the accelerator pedal for our entire metabolism. So we have receptors for free T3 in every single cell of the body, and human beings have somewhere between 50 to 100 trillion, no big deal, right? 50 to 100 trillion cells in the body, all of which require free T3, except for red blood cells, so one exception, because they don't have a nucleus. But aside from those red blood cells, all of our cells take in that free T3. It enters the cell nucleus, it interacts with our mitochondria, and it's essentially activating or stimulating those mitochondria to produce ATP, to produce cellular energy. This is why when free T3 levels decline, we experience symptoms like fatigue, brain fog, depression, constipation, low libido, hair loss, hair thinning, cold intolerance. I think I might have said that one already. All right, these are some of the most common symptoms that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention weight gain, such a common symptom of slow thyroid function or hypothyroidism, right? So when that free T3 level drops, it's slowing down our whole entire metabolism. So I wrote down here at the bottom right that this marker would be low. From a functional perspective, we want to see that more like a 3.4 to a 4.4. So 2.6 is actually quite low. And it correlates very well with the degree to
lockdown. Gosh, I swear I can't walk away for a second. Okay.
everything good?
Ryan, my dear friend. Ryan, sorry not to cut you off. You just completely, somehow you got put into the background. It does not seem like it was long. Does anyone have an exceptional memory and remember it was not long at all? And sorry, I know this is going to be a 30, 60-second delay, so take a break for a second if you don't mind.
Sure.
Let us know. Yes, it's recorded. Everything's good. We're all good, guys. Sorry for the delay. So let me know what was the last part you guys heard. We'll put it on the stream here. I don't even know how you would have gotten removed. It's so weird. If it glitched for a second, I guess that is how it would have happened. So, yes,
okay.
Sorry. Let's see what they heard here.
Hey, it happens.
All right. The link took me to an older video, but I found y'all. Okay. We got people talking about Mercury.
Mercury. Oh, Mercury retrograde strikes again. Dang it.
There we go.
Is it actually Mercury retrograde right now?
That's not even above my pay grade, just not within my pay grade at all.
Just making chit chat. Yep.
Okay.
When free T3 levels drop, metabolism drops. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for the answer. I'll get out of the way. And that's not too long ago, right, Ryan? That's fine.
No, I don't think so. I'm happy to do like a power recap too. Not a problem at all.
Sorry, man. Thank you very much.
All good. Yeah, let's get back to it. Thanks, everyone, and apologies for the interruption. Yeah, so free T3, again, we have receptors for free T3 in nearly every single cell of our body. I call it the accelerator pedal for the metabolism. It's that profound and powerful. And for that reason, on a side note, I do run a thyroid panel on every single client that I work with. Call me maybe biased because I went through my own journey with thyroid dysfunction that was very, very severe. But also, it's about 20 million people or so that are estimated to be diagnosed with a thyroid condition in the United States. It's a lot of people. I feel like everyone and their cousin and their hairdresser that I know is diagnosed with some kind of thyroid issue. So this is affecting literally millions of people. And I've said this in past presentations, but I'll repeat it again. It's very difficult to bring the body back online, so to speak, until you're able to correct the thyroid. Okay. And just to recap here briefly, the slightly more than elevated TSH and the low free T3 are both a classic pattern for slow hypothyroid function. I also made the point here that thyroid issues are almost always a whole body problem. Okay. So it's just a starting place. We don't quote unquote treat the thyroid. We don't treat anything at all as FDNs, right? We're uncovering signs of dysfunction and restoring dysfunction, but we don't want to get narrowly focused on the thyroid either. We want to view it as a starting place and then start to gather other clues. All right, moving along. Just a quick recap on thyroid panel basics here, guys. You're even welcome to take a screenshot if you like here. I have my little nicknames for all of the different markers on a thyroid panel. The ones that we primarily looked at here with the previous panel were the TSH, which I call the signal. That's the pituitary signal. That's what's stimulating the thyroid to go. Then we have free T4, which is sort of like the potential energy. It's the reservoir or fuel tank that thyroid hormone is not active or bioavailable until it gets converted into T3, right? And the majority of that conversion happens in the liver. So it's T3, that's the accelerator, which makes reverse T3 the brake pedal. So you don't want reverse T3 to be too high because that's slowing things down. And then, of course, you have the antibodies, like thyroid peroxidase or thyroglobulin antibodies, which, if elevated, would indicate autoimmune activity to the thyroid. By the way, this is an important point. If your thyroid is sluggish, if it's slow, chances are that autoimmunity is at the root cause of that. What happens is you get this damage physiologically to the tissue of the thyroid gland from the autoimmune component, and then that damage and destruction compromises the thyroid's ability to make thyroid hormone. I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that already had a prior hypothyroid diagnosis, but they didn't know they had Hashimoto's because their doctor never ran antibodies. So they didn't know that the actual cause of their slow thyroid function was this autoimmune attack on the thyroid. Okay, so that's really important when we're doing a thyroid panel that we include all 5 of these markers here. This panel, by the way, it was a little bit more basic, but I did have the information I needed just to confirm a slow thyroid pattern with the higher TSH and the low free T3. Now, I want to get into my theory as to why I think this individual was experiencing slow or a slow thyroid function or hypothyroidism. So this is where I'm going to start to bring in together some other labs to understand that thyroid panel in context, because everything is about understanding what's going on in context of the whole system. There's a lot going on in this diagram, and it's one of my favorites as far as thyroid diagrams are concerned. But there's one specific component that I want to focus in on and hone in on here today. So one reason I like this diagram is it's showing you the process of thyroid hormone production. Okay. So for example, our thyroid hormone, T4 and T3, Where do we get these letters and numbers from? What do those mean? Well, the letter T actually stands for the amino acid tyrosine, which we get from protein, ideally. It's an amino acid. Tyrosine primarily comes from another amino acid we get from the diet called phenylalanine. Okay, so, and we get these amino acids from the diet, once again, ideally through adequate protein and good protein absorption in the gut. These numbers here, the 4 and the 3, actually refer to the number of iodine molecules being taken in to the thyroid through the sodium iodide symporters here, the NIS. You can see iodine here at the bottom left being taken into the thyroid gland to help with the synthesis of thyroid hormone. But what's responsible for sort of packaging that thyroid hormone and putting it all together? So putting that iodine together with the tyrosine, there's a lot more to it than that. I am oversimplifying, but there's an enzyme responsible for that assembly process of putting together the tyrosine and the iodine. And that's this enzyme here called TPO, thyroid peroxidase. If you look at thyroid peroxidase right alongside it or attached to it, you see Fe. And Fe, we know on the periodic table, stands for iron. So the main takeaway that I want to share from this slide is that TPO is an iron-dependent enzyme. What that means is that it's serving like a cofactor. Think of it as though TPO was like a car, and the iron would be the keys to the ignition. So that TPO enzyme, which assembles our thyroid hormone, is only as good as the amount of iron we have in the system to activate that enzyme. Isn't that interesting? So another way to say this and simplify it is that the production of thyroid hormone requires iron. It's non-negotiable. Non-negotiable. It's part of I like to call it baking the cake of thyroid hormone. We need tyrosine, we need iodine, we need iron. We need all these different ingredients like the flour, the eggs, and the sugar to bake the cake and to make the thyroid hormone. Pretty simple, right? Not too complicated. And by the way, our thyroid does not produce very much T3. Excuse me, just getting over the flu. Our thyroid mostly produces T4 in a ratio of about 80% T4 and about 20% T3. And then the remainder of that conversion happens in the liver, the kidneys, skeletal muscle, and other peripheral tissues. So our thyroid is mostly making T4, not a whole lot of T3. But also, hopefully this goes without saying before I move on, if you don't have enough iron to support the production of T4, if your T4 is low, you don't have enough T4 in the tank to even make the T3, right? So if your T4 is low, chances are almost guaranteed that your T3 will also be low. Okay, here is the same client, 60-year-old female. We're calling her Marla. This was her iron panel. This is what I'm trying to show you guys, how everything is interconnected. Her iron and her ferritin is your iron storage in the liver, were both not just low, but very low. And once again, neither of these were flagged on the blood chemistry report. I'm using what we call optimal ranges or functional ranges, which I've given here in the red lettering. So at an iron level of a 40, we want to see this between 85 to 130. I mean, what do you think? Not looking so hot. That's half of the bottom end of the reference range. And if we took the midpoint between 85 to 130, that would be what, at least 100, right? 100, 110 might be kind of like the sweet spot. Ferritin was even lower respective to iron, to its own reference range. So for ferritin, we want to see that more between 50 to 100 nanograms per milliliter. 18 is very, very, very low, right? That we're talking more like 3 times below the reference range, where the midpoint between 50 to 100 is 75. So we're really, really far off there. And what I'm trying to show here is that there's not enough iron to support the production of thyroid hormone, going all the way back to that first slide there with the high TSH and the low free T3. right? It would be like trying to bake a cake without the flour. And hopefully it's gluten-free flour for this whole the whole crowd that we're with today. It's almond flour, coconut flour. I only get to make jokes like that in this kind of group. All right, so there you have it with the iron panel. And so we also happen to have one of my favorite tests here, which is the organic acid test. And some of you might know I teach a course on organic acids. So this is right in my wheelhouse. And so what we have here on the organic acid test, and by the way, for those of you that aren't familiar, just very quickly, the OAT test is a urine test, and we're looking at different metabolites of function in the body. And if these metabolites build up beyond a certain threshold, that can provide us clues that there's some kind of dysfunction in the body. It's a very comprehensive test. There are 76 markers on the OAT test in total. So it's, I've compared it to being like a buffet, like a functional lab test buffet, because it gives us insights into so many different areas, from microbial overgrowth to energy production to neurotransmitters to nutrient levels and more. Now, there weren't very many findings on this OAT test, so I didn't include the whole thing. That would take probably another hour-long webinar to do that. But what I did include was one significant elevation, marker number 22, which was lactic acid. Okay, so our lactic acid was above the reference range of a 48 out of 50 there. So it was flagged high in the lab. Let's go a little bit deeper into this, and this will be a little bit tangential, but I promise it's still related, and we're going to circle it all back like I always like to do. So first and foremost, we see this subsection of the OAT here called glycolytic cycle metabolites. So what is a glycolytic metabolite? So there we're referring to a biochemical process that occurs in our cells known as glycolysis. And glycolysis, that word literally means splitting glucose. So it's referring to the body's ability to break down glucose for energy. So it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's our body's ability to use the sugar we get from fruits and vegetables and grains and that sort of thing, and to convert it into usable energy, into ATP. Now, there are two other processes that occur in our cell, specifically within the mitochondria, one of which is called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. The other is called the electron transport chain. We also call it oxidative phosphorylation. Oxidative because it uses oxygen, right? So our mitochondria use oxygen to produce energy. This is an aerobic process. So follow along here because these steps are going to be important, right? And that's assuming normal, healthy, ideal conditions. So for cellular respiration to work, that oxidative phosphorylation, we need to deliver oxygen to our cells. So how do we deliver that oxygen to our cells? We do that through hemoglobin, right? Now, if you break down that word hemoglobin, it's a protein, found in our red blood cells. And when you think of the word hemoglobin, think of heme as an iron. So it's an iron-dependent protein. So hemoglobin, I can't remember where I once heard this, but it's been described as like the waiter or waitress in the body carrying around oxygen through the bloodstream and delivering it to all of our cells. So our mitochondria can gobble up that oxygen and help us to produce ATP, to produce energy. All right, so what happens if we don't have enough iron though? So under less than ideal conditions, if we're deficient in iron, then our hemoglobin levels will typically drop. We'll see with low iron on a blood panel, we'll see hemoglobin drop. And then we're in a situation where we're not delivering oxygen to our cells, which is not very good because we're starved for oxygen. So in the absence of that oxygen, our mitochondria struggle to produce energy through the usual means, through oxidative phosphorylation. What happens then is our cells resort to a backup plan. It's an anaerobic process. It means we're producing energy without oxygen. And as a result of that anaerobic process, lactic acid starts to build up as a byproduct. So when lactic acid builds up, that's how we might know that we're in an anaerobic state, that our cells are making energy without oxygen. And that can happen, again, because there's not enough iron to deliver oxygen to our cells. Hopefully this is all making sense. I know there's a few kind of moving parts here. So to summarize, what does this all have to do with iron and energy? We need iron to form hemoglobin in order to deliver oxygen to our trillions of cells. As a result of iron deficiency, this creates cellular hypoxia. So low iron results in reduced oxygen delivery, results in impaired mitochondrial ATP production, and as a result, you'll often see lactic acid building up when we're in an anaerobic state. So kind of neat here, what I'm showing is this correlation. We're seeing this crosstalk between the labs. Rather than looking at the labs in isolation, we're seeing how, all right, there's clearly iron and ferritin deficiency on the blood chemistry, but then we're also seeing the consequence. That's what the oat is showing us, the consequence of that iron deficiency. The consequence being that our cells are starved from oxygen. And so as a result, we're going into this very inefficient backup process, this anaerobic process of lactic acid fermentation and producing energy without oxygen. Now, by the way, what are the symptoms of this occurring when we have cellular hypoxia? When we're not getting enough oxygen to the cells, we're going to feel fatigue. We're going to feel brain fog. We might have headaches because we're not getting enough oxygen delivered to our brain, right? We might have cold hands and feet, as would be a common symptom. We might feel dizzy when we stand up, like postural hypotension. Again, think of all of these things being associated with low iron and poor delivery of oxygen throughout the body. If you can't tell, I really love this stuff, guys. I love to see how all of this stuff is interconnected. Before we move on to the GI map here, which we're going to do shortly in just a second, I want to just do a quick health history review, some of which we've already talked about here. But once again, her main issue was digestive complaints. So you might think it to be kind of curious that I started this off with a conversation around the thyroid and iron, and also this whole business around cellular hypoxia. But I promise it's all going to come back around and be tied together when we look at the GI map. Again, so huge digestive issues for 20 years, abdominal discomfort and burning, loose stools, alcohol, garlic, and meat, eating meat, specifically red meat, by the way. She does, if I remember correctly, eat chicken and fish and maybe eggs, maybe. Eats ice cream before bed. It has a history of antibiotic use, so that's important too for interpreting the stool test. That Hashimoto's diagnosis for 25 years, that's a long time. Feels cold often, low energy in the morning. Well, not only would that, be correlated back to the slow thyroid function, but also the low iron as well, with the feeling cold and the low energy in the morning. So it's kind of a double whammy. And of course, those two are very closely tied together. Endometriosis diagnosis, trouble staying asleep, waking up at 3 a.m. In my opinion, I would attribute that to the ice cream before bed. I think that's a very clearly a blood sugar issue. And so I don't like drawing, hard lines in the sand unless I need to put on my hard hat when I'm coaching. But that's one of those cases where that's just gotta go, the ice cream before bed, if she wants to sleep, soundly through the night. And that's so important because sleep is the master detoxifier. That's where we do the majority of our detoxification and healing and repair. Right? It's the ultimate anti-aging drug is just getting a good, optimal, high-quality night's sleep. Arthritis for 7 years, so that's affecting her knees, her feet, her back, her neck. She takes B12. This is an interesting clue as well for pernicious anemia. Has seasonal allergies, and lastly, thankfully, is open to modifying diet and lifestyle. So that's always good, right? We want to take on clients that are willing to change. Otherwise, honestly, they might not be the best candidate to take on. Okay, so we're not going to look at the entire GI map, but we are going to look at some of the more important bits and pieces. One of those very important bits and pieces was the fact here that H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, is detected above the reference range. Okay, there's a lot to say about this here. So first of all, H. pylori has a very high association in a lot of clinical literature. I'll show you at least a couple examples on the next slide, with being a potential trigger for autoimmunity. Now, she's got Hashimoto's. She has an endometriosis diagnosis. She has arthritis. She has this inflammatory autoimmune type of pattern. Furthermore, beyond it just being a potential trigger, H. pylori, this is really key. H. pylori is notorious for altering the pH of our stomach acid. So actually, this is a typo here. This is supposed to say 7 to 8, okay? So if you guys can just mentally make that correction in your mind. In a normal, healthy stomach environment, our pH should be very low, which is more acidic. The lower the pH, the more acidic in the gut. So a healthy stomach should have a pH of around a 1 or a 2, which, by the way, that's very acidic. That's around the same pH level as battery acid. Okay, so that's how acidic our stomach should be. Why do we want that? Why do we want an acidic stomach environment? Two reasons primarily. One reason that we want an acidic environment in the stomach is to help us to break down our food, namely protein, to help break down our protein into its constituent amino acids. Right? So we need that stomach acid as a means of breaking down and digesting our food. Secondly, that stomach acid serves as a sort of biochemical barrier, like an electric fence for potential pathogens. You know, all day long, we're eating food, we're drinking water, we're getting exposed to different bacteria from the outside world. We need that stomach acid to sort of, for lack of a better term, kind of burn off that bacteria to prevent them from colonizing the intestinal tract, to colonize the large or the small bowel. Okay, so what I meant to say here is H. pylori is notorious for raising the pH of our stomach acid up to a 7 or an 8, or like a 6 or a 7. Right? So normally a healthy stomach should be around a 1 or a 2. And H. pylori has the ability to produce certain enzymes like urease that raise that pH up to a 6 or a 7. Now, on the pH scale, a 6 or a 7 is like milk or water. It's much more neutral. It's a much more neutral pH. So, try breaking down your food or your protein with milk or water in your gut. It's not going to really be effective. It's not going to work very well. And you also might be, on a side note, more susceptible to certain pathogens because you lose that biochemical barrier, right? So the reason I'm going into this amount of depth with H. pylori and how it affects the pH of our stomach acid is that the breakdown of iron and B12, those two nutrients, iron and B12, more than any other nutrients in our diet, require a very acidic environment, a lower pH in the stomach in order to break down those specific nutrients, in order to liberate them from our food, to break them down and to assimilate them, to absorb them into the body. So with high levels of H. pylori, the assumption here is that the pH is altered. We have a higher pH, more like a 6 or a 7, which is more like milk or water. And that is affecting our ability to break down or absorb iron, right? So recall on the previous slide, she had said that eating meat makes it worse. Now, this is a pretty common phenomenon when people lose their stomach acid, basically. They have hypochlorhydria, they have insufficient stomach acid. They might start to lose the ability to break down, to digest meat in the diet, and they might start to develop sort of like an aversion to eating meat. When The problem isn't actually the meat. It's ultimately a gut issue. It's a form of gut dysfunction, right? So by not eating meat, not only is she not digesting and absorbing iron from the diet, but it becomes kind of a confounding variable, like a double whammy, because she's not breaking down the iron from her diet, but also is not eating the meat where she would be getting the iron from the diet. And so you go all the way back here to where we started, where we see this very low iron. And that low iron is affecting thyroid levels. There's not enough iron to make thyroid hormone. And can you see what I'm getting at with this? This is a classic domino effect or cascading effect, where this all, I think it very likely started in the gut. You know, we love to say all health or all disease, conversely, all disease begins in the gut. Well, here's one of thousands of reasons why that's actually true. So I would make a solid case here that the iron issue ultimately is coming back from what's going on in the gut. Because it's not as though she's not getting any iron. She is eating chicken, fish in the diet. If she were to able to work in some organ meats, if at all, in the diet, organ meats are on average about 4 times higher in iron than an equivalent serving of red meat. So organ meats are a fantastic way to get your iron levels up. You could even supplement with them if you don't fancy the taste of eating organ meats in the diet, which a lot of people don't. So there's different ways around that. Okay, so all right, well, there you have it, right? There's H. pylori above the reference range. H. pylori is notorious for altering pH, and that's affecting iron assimilation. Now, this intestinal health section, not going to lie, pretty messy. This is a total mess. So again, we're not going to go over every marker here because this was, talk about huge digestive issues for 20 years, abdominal discomfort, burning. Well, yeah, okay. Now we clearly see why this is going on. So some major bombshells here. So let's start with this extreme immune reactivity to gluten. So this anti-gliadin IgA. So gluten is a very large super protein complex, and gliadin is the largest protein fraction that makes up that gluten super protein complex. So for all intents and purposes, when you see the word gliadin, just think gluten. They're one and the same. So with anti-gliadin IgA, what that means is we're producing antibodies to gluten. Her immune system is pissed off that there's gluten in the system. Not only that, but the reference range only goes up to 175, and here she's above 500. That greater than symbol means that the lab actually maxes out there. So she's some number far greater than, not necessarily far greater. It could be 501, could be 700, could be 1,000, but it's some unknown number above where the lab actually tops off there at 500. Okay, so there's some extreme reactivity to gluten. She definitely needs to go on a gluten-free diet here. With that amount of gluten reactivity, there would be a pretty strong assumption here of damage to the villi, which is where we absorb all of the nutrients in our small intestine. So villus atrophy, and also intestinal permeability or leaky gut. Okay. So tying this all into our conversation around iron and even her chronic longstanding B12 deficiency, I would have to assume that this is only playing into it even further because of the damage being done to the mucosa, to the villi, to the epithelial cells that make up the gut barrier, that's only making this whole absorption issue even worse. The ability to absorb nutrients is probably very, very poor in this case. Okay. Furthermore, we see this elevation in zonulin, and that's a classic relationship, the elevation in anti-gliadin IgA and elevated zonulin. Okay, so we know from the clinical literature that anti-gliadin IgA, that gluten exposure, induces the epithelial cells that make up the gut lining to release zonulin, and in turn, zonulin induces intestinal permeability. It unravels the tight junctions that hold the cells that make up the gut lining. It causes them to unravel. And then you have kind of a free-for-all. You have all these foreign objects and antigens leaking through that mucosal barrier into the bloodstream where they don't belong. And then you get the fire alarms going off. You get TNF alpha, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, these inflammatory cytokines creating an inflammatory storm that has systemic effects that extend far beyond even the gut, right? So not only would I expect symptoms to be expected here in the gut, but also I would expect those symptoms to extend far beyond just what's going on in the gut alone. What happens in the gut doesn't just stay in the gut, in other words. It's going to have far-reaching implications, okay? So the big picture here is that I'm showing that not only does this pattern strongly correlate with these digestive issues which have been plaguing her for 2 decades. That's way too long to go on with your life feeling like that, first of all. But also it would explain multiple different reasons why there's malabsorption and leaky gut and altered pH, all these different reasons why she's probably not absorbing iron. Possibly if I were to run an HTMA or like a micronutrient panel, I would not be surprised one bit if there were multiple nutrient and or mineral deficiencies on top of what's going on here. Now, we don't want to interpret those findings just alone, but we want to understand the greater context of the health of the microbiome as a whole. So I noted here a couple examples of where 2 very, very key commensal bacteria, or what we call keystone bacteria, are either low or very low. So noted here that 25 years ago in her history, she took a very strong antibiotic for TB. That was what was in the notes there. So I assumed TB to be tuberculosis. For 6 weeks, it's a long time to be on antibiotics, had to stop due to liver issues. And she, in her own words, suspected that this had a big impact on her gut. Okay. So 25 years is a long time ago. So it's very difficult to say that this current snapshot in time of a stool sample is reflective of something that happened 25 years ago. But at the same time, if the issue was never corrected, who knows how long that issue could linger? It's really hard to say unless you had another stool test from 25 years ago to compare to. All right, so these 2 bacteria, Akkermansia muciniphila and Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, are absolutely essential to the strength and resilience of the microbiome for maintaining mucosal barrier health, maintaining optimal short-chain fatty acid levels like butyrate, taming inflammation, promoting immune tolerance, and more. Okay, so I'm mentioning this because we don't merely just want to go killing off H. pylori, right? That may be part of it. You know, using some targeted antimicrobials like mastic gum to get that under control. But we also have to understand the environment in which this dysfunction is occurring. Because when we lose these keystone bacteria, we lose the foundation. We lose the strength and resilience of the microbiome that would normally maintain a healthy intestinal environment to begin with. Okay, so we can promote the strength or the balance of Akkermansia with polyphenols in the diet, like through olive oil would be a good example. So extra virgin olive oil, dark chocolate, berries, coffee, even green tea. These are great sources of polyphenols that can support Akkermansia. F. prausnitzii responds very well to resistant starches. So that might include everything from beans and lentils to cooking rice or potatoes and then cooling those starches to transform it into a resistant starch. Green bananas or green plantains would be another source of resistant starch. So again, I make this point because it's not just about killing, it's also supporting the overall health and balance of the terrain of the gut. Okay, and so it's very likely that this terrain has maybe persisted for decades if she had taken strong antibiotics and may have allowed some of these things to occur in the first place, may have allowed something like H. pylori to proliferate in the system. Now, just wanted to share, there's so much. I could have done a whole presentation just on this alone, but just a couple quick snapshots here. One from Frontiers in Immunology, showing us that H. pylori is a potential trigger of gastric autoimmunity, and it may be associated with other autoimmune diseases, both innate and acquired. All right, so examples in the literature where H. pylori has been established as an autoimmune trigger. Another paper here from OncoTarget, which is a meta-analysis. That's where they aggregate data from a multitude of studies. So they gathered data from 15 studies in over 3,000 patients, and basically said that they've proven that autoimmune thyroid disease, like Hashimoto's, patients have a higher incidence of H. pylori than people without autoimmune thyroid disease, and that the elimination of it helps to lower the associated autoantibodies. And on a side note, that's absolutely what I saw in my own case. One of my very first stool tests that I ran as an FDN trainee, I think it was the BioHealth 401H. It's an old school stool test. But I had H. pylori on that very first stool test. And I did a protocol to get rid of it. And my antibodies, I don't remember the exact number, but they fell by maybe 30% or something the next time I had tested my thyroid antibodies, which was incredible to see that relationship. So cascading effects here. With that H. pylori, we talked about it altering gut pH to be less acidic, resulting in an inability to break down and absorb iron. And without that ability to absorb iron, that can affect our ability to synthesize thyroid hormone. Now, by the way, I haven't mentioned this yet, but she might share those results with her doctor, and her doctor might think, without understanding these relationships, that might be a signal to increase the dose of her thyroid medication, of her Synthroid or levothyroxine or whatever she might be on to support her thyroid. When in reality, it might be a simple matter of, well, first and foremost, addressing the conditions in the gut, and as a result, allowing her body to more effectively absorb and assimilate iron into the system. Right? It would at least be worth a shot to see where you would get with that, to see how that would correct the thyroid, just addressing a simple nutrient deficiency. So direct symptoms of H. pylori, look at any infographic on H. pylori, you'll see this come up. Abdominal discomfort, pain, burning, that's her number one complaint. That's maybe one of the most common symptoms you'll see with H. pylori. And then you'll see more indirect symptoms, which might be the result of malabsorption of nutrients, things like fatigue, cold intolerance, because it's how affecting oxygen delivery, and even autoimmunity, like we just saw with that the brief snapshots with that literature there. Okay, so just to talk briefly about some supplement suggestions or protocols here. On the right here, I have a snapshot from FullScript with some potential supplement recommendations, including things like Biocidin and Gastromen, which is a mastic gum product, as a 1-2 punch there to address the H. pylori. I've got some butyrate in there in the form of tributyrin from Designs for Health. With that F. prosnitzii being low, that keystone bacteria, that's a strong implication of low butyrate levels. And butyrate is absolutely essential for maintaining the health and integrity of the mucosal barrier. It acts like a fuel source to keep our gut lining healthy. Okay, so I realize that the GI map doesn't test for butyrate, but I can assure you that with low F. prosnitzii levels, that low butyrate is a guarantee. Okay, so think of butyrate as one of the most useful tools in your toolkit for addressing leaky gut, which we know she has. We've confirmed that with the high zonulin. Getting off gluten is going to be a very, very important part of this overall healing picture. Okay. I included a resistant starch-based prebiotic from Hyperbiotics here. It contains some acacia fiber, Jerusalem artichoke, green banana flower, some targeted prebiotics to support some of those keystone bacteria and rebuild the resilience of the microbiome. A digestive enzyme, some of her digestive markers were off or low there, so definitely need some digestive support. So once again, 100% strict removal of all gluten and potentially gluten cross-reactive foods like oats, barley, and corn. Would strongly be recommending for her, at least during a healing phase and protocol, to go alcohol and dairy-free. I don't think the ice cream after dinner is helping with her sleep. Starting to incorporate more diversity in the diet to support, again, the diversity, the species richness of the microbiome with prebiotics, resistant starches, polyphenol-rich foods. Polyphenols, that's going to help to feed that Akkermansia bacteria that was very, very low. And that can include extra virgin olive oil, dark chocolate, berries, coffee, green tea, which is rich in an antioxidant called EGCG. So remember, we had talked about that she has a lot of stress, but doesn't feel like she has the tools to deal with it. It's going to be a non-negotiable part of this healing picture. Things like breath work, heart math, meditation, yoga, prayer, gratitude journaling. There's a lot of ways to slice and dice this, as long as we have something consistent throughout, just as consistently as we're taking our supplements and just as consistently as we're eating a healthy diet. Stress reduction, unfortunately, I find with a lot of clients, they allow that to go on the back burner when it's a non-negotiable part of the healing process. Okay, our body can't heal when we're in a state of fight or flight. We do the majority of our healing when we're in a calm, parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system state. Yeah, we'll leave it at that because otherwise I'll go on an hour tangent. Blood sugar management is going to be a huge part of her protocol as well. So these are all within that DRESS framework, right? Diet, rest, exercise, stress reduction, targeted supplementation. Think of them each as being like one finger on a hand, that we need to support each of these key areas in order to experience optimal health. All right, let's wrap things up here, and then we could do a whole lot of Q&A. So some key takeaways. Breakdown may start in the gut, but it can have far-reaching implications. What happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. As FDN practitioners, we're trained to look at the whole picture and to observe deeper clinical patterns across labs, right? This is the true mark of a very skilled practitioner is your ability to see how the labs are interconnected. As such, single biomarkers being out of range, for example, TSH, they're not isolated events. Everything in the body is interrelated. Thyroid dysfunction is a whole body problem, not a thyroid problem. So we saw that with the iron deficiency, with everything going on in the gut. Iron deficiency issues are often rooted in a combination of low hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which can often be caused by H. pylori, malabsorption issues, digestive insufficiency, and leaky gut. Protocols must be designed to address multiple forms of dysfunction across multiple systems. Okay, so we want to get rid of this idea of a root cause. There is no root cause. I like to say it's more like a web of interrelated healing opportunities. Okay, when you start digging in and working with a client, you're going to find, look at the GI map alone. There was H. pylori, digestive dysfunction, anti-gliadin antibodies, high zonulin indicating leaky gut. We saw the iron deficiency. We saw the high lactic acid on the oat test. So there's some like oxygenation issues going on at the cellular level. So all these different problems, we need to put them together and create a roadmap and a plan towards getting that client back on their feet in the right direction. And then lastly, supplements are only a small part of the overall healing picture. You can't outrun diet and lifestyle with supplements, okay? We need to dial in the diet, lifestyle, and environment, stress reduction, et cetera. These are all non-negotiable, as far as bringing the system back into balance and restoring homeostasis. So, all right, guys, let's pause there.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And I think they will finally understand one of the famous sayings around here about Ryan Monahan, and that is women love him, men want to be him. And you guys just got to see firsthand why that is today with this amazing case study. So that was awesome, man. Thank you so much. We're going to leave this up for you guys. I really cannot recommend enough the looking into the clinical fast track if you are a grad. And, it kind of goes right to one of the first questions here. So we have some pinned. We'll get right into this. I'm going to actually, Melissa, I'm going to go to yours second, even though yours was first, and there's a reason for this. So is the OAT test one of the key five trainees will learn and use for themselves in FDN? So I've actually been very good and on my best behavior this Discovery Series. I don't think I've said my Picasso quote one time, so I will use this as an excuse to bring it up because it's a good question. Picasso had this quote that says if you kind of want to, you have to learn the rules like a master to break them like an artist. Okay, that's basically the quote. And the reason I like to reference that, even though it is a little cheesy and funny, is because I have no idea where this individual person's coming from background-wise. So I'm answering this question generally, by the way, not for you specifically. We need to understand that a lot of people are coming into this program with very limited lab experience or very all over the place lab experience. They don't have any system that they use. They're not able to get consistent results. With that said, that's what FDN is for. FDN is that proven methodology. Reed had done this with over 11,000 people before he actually taught it to other individuals. And so we always start there. That's called learning the rules like a master. That's the part of the quote that I'm referring to there. So we're going to learn the rules like a master. And on day one, when we go out and take our first client, again, this is assuming that you're one of the many people who join our program without lab experience, without a consistent system that actually is helping every single client that you work with. We're going to do it Reed's way. Not because we're saying Reed is the only answer or only authority in the functional health universe. He doesn't even say that. But we're doing it his way because we don't have the experience ourselves. So let's do what we were just trained on, do what we just paid for, do what we just took months to study. That's how we're going to serve the client. And if you do that, I've been here for 9 years. Again, Ryan, 10 plus at this point, as an FDN, not working for them, but as an FDN. When you start with the foundational, you can take on almost any client out there, with maybe the one exception being something like a terminal cancer, man. That might be the one exception. And of course, if you were going to take someone like that on, you really have to make sure the doctors are involved and all that kind of stuff and know that you are involved in any way. Without that extreme example, everyone else is going to get at least somewhat better when you do the foundational labs. And when you have been very sick for a long time, if you only got 30% better, that's pretty darn good, but that's not what most of our people get. Most of our people do feel 60 to 70% better in about 3 to 4 months. That's great when you've been sick for a decade or more. It's pretty great in general, I would say. So last part of the quote, learn the rules like a master so you can break them like an artist. So what does that mean? It means that when we're using these advanced labs and we're showcasing these case studies for you guys, just to give you a direct answer if this isn't clear, the OAT is not in the foundational, but you need to understand why, because you might say, well, isn't the OAT a good test? Ryan just presented it today. I thought it was a good test. It can be a good test. That can be true as well. But you're talking about a now more complicated test. If you guys have ever looked at the markers on an OAT, that alone is enough to make your brain explode. I was just on, by coincidence, with Mosaic yesterday, early in the morning, and they were showing me their new OAT report, and they've actually had to simplify some of the stuff because it's so much. Not to mention their new practitioner reference guide. I got to see this, and then Ryan will be getting to see this soon too. I hooked him up with the team, so he's going to be meeting with them. It is 223 pages. That is the practitioner reference guide for Mosaic's OAT test, formerly Great Plains, just so you can do that test. So imagine if we were to take you guys and try to put this as just one of 5 that you need to learn in the main course. 1, we're going to have to charge significantly more. 2, you're going to be spending way too long here. So we learn the rules like a master so we can break them like an artist. And the second part of that means as we get our clientele together and we figure out who do we like to work with. So Ryan and I have that business together, Autoimmune Recovery Lab. Now that's actually a little bit more broad than we'd probably recommend a brand new FDN, just to be clear. And it's not a hypocritical thing. This is not a do as I say and not as I do. There's a reason that we went that route, which we can discuss in a different podcast or webinar. But when we're talking autoimmune things, even with every autoimmune disease, we do see similarities. We do see patterns. And so we have realized over many years of experience, hey, we can kind of break this like an artist just because this specific test that we are trained in, that's probably the most important part that we're trained in, we can actually help this individual. And so I don't mean to go too much farther into this. It's actually not a question that has come up much this Discovery Series, probably because we haven't presented a ton of labs. But as the case studies happen, you're going to find that every single FDN we bring to you this week is probably using a slightly different combination of labs with some overlap. So I'm taking the time to answer it now so that you guys understand that. And the final thing I'll say with this is everyone always wants to know, what's the best lab test though, Ev? Is this OAT thing, is that the best one? Is the GI map, is that the best one? I'm not sure. I really am not. What if I had to define it as just one, that there is one best lab test? Blood work is the most scientifically validated, so you could argue that, I guess. But other ones I can't even tell you. What I do know is this. The best functional lab test is the one that you know how to interpret because you're trained to use it. So you could have one with better technology, but if it's hieroglyphics to you when you try to read it, that is actually not a better test for you or your client. It's a disservice to them. The best one might be a test that is 50% as advanced in terms of the technology, but you understand it in and out and thus can serve your client at the highest level. So, Ryan, I chose that one first. One, to just give you a break because you've been presenting for a while. I don't know if there's anything that you want to add to that particular one, but this is not our foundational, in our foundational labs. There's a variety of reasons for that. Or we can move on to the next question. Up to you.
Love the Picasso quote. Also,
Thank you.
I'm a lifelong musician, and there's a similar quote from Charlie Parker, which is something along the lines of you need to master all of the scales before you can forget them, right? So it needs to be sort of ingrained almost into your DNA before you can like transcend just, sticking with those foundations. But it's the same idea. You need to start there, right? And look, I'll say this too. This is totally against my self-interest to say this because I teach a course on the organic acid test. My recommendation to anyone who's in the course or is intending to take the FDN course is do not take my course until you finish FDN. Okay. I really think you need those foundations first. And the OAT, it's a great test, but there's a steep learning curve. And you really need those foundations dialed in first, in my opinion. Otherwise, I think you might be overwhelmed.
Yep.
Right. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's sort of like, needing to learn your ABCs before you can form sentences, before you can write an essay, before you can write a book. These things all build on each other.
This is why Ryan's the best, because some astute people might think, oh, is that reverse psychology? It's like, no, that's literally what he means. He's like, just go do this other thing first. Yeah. So it's awesome. That's what we love about you. All right.
For sure. Yeah. I just try to put myself in the place of when I was in the course myself. If I had taken my own OAT course, I'd find it to be pretty fascinating. I might be a little lost.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy to be honest and tell it like it is. Which OAT test do you use? A lot of OAT questions. I use the Mosaic through and through. It's really the only OAT test worth running, to be honest.
Yep. I just saw the beautiful comments that came up on the stream because I'm in the pin section right now. So these are ones that came up throughout the time that you were presenting. Some of these are from earlier, but there's awesome comments, guys. Thanks for showing so much love to our presenters in the chat. And yet, for those that are not aware, Mosaic, if you've been out of the space for a little bit or just had a blip, Mosaic was formerly Great Plains Laboratory. So they have since switched.
Good call. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Does it matter when you collect the sample for female clients?
Well, no. I think the implication here is like when you're running a urine sample for a Dutch test, right? You want to run that test roughly around 5 days after ovulation. Mm-hmm. When you're testing for female hormones through the urine. The OAT test does not test for anything hormone related whatsoever. For that reason, a female can run the OAT any old day of the week. There's no limitations there.
Just be 100% clear, because we have a variety of levels of education with it. We don't mean that in a condescending way. It's just you never know where someone's at. The oat test still, though, is always taken on that first urine. You're just answering specifically for the hormone side. Like I can't take my oat test at night after I peed like 30 times that day.
Well, yeah, if they're referring to what time of day,
Yes.
then yes, you want to collect the oat, the first urine of the day, basically.
Perfect.
So you want to be fasting overnight, and you collect the first morning urine. And it's as simple as that. It's actually one of the easiest tests to collect for, where, as opposed to something like a blood draw, it's not everyone's favorite thing to do per se. Where the oat test is just a small, very small urine sample in a little cup, and you send it off to the lab, and it's pretty much it. It's pretty simple.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. All right. How would you describe the mechanism of action of how mold disrupts thyroid function? Well, you're about to get a whole nother hour webinar with this question. But,
For real. Yeah. Well, so I assume the name is Shelby. So Shelby, hi, thank you for the question. And you may not know this, but not only was I diagnosed with Hashimoto's, but I went through severe mold illness. And so I learned a lot more about mold than I ever cared to learn. That was actually sort of one of the original reasons I got into the organic acid test to begin with, because the oat test does have several markers for mold colonization. So anyways, to answer your question, mechanism of action. Okay, so where to start? Because there's so many I could mention. I would say one of which is through the traditional means of autoimmunity. If we think about this from a fundamentals perspective, that autoimmunity is essentially a form of loss of immune tolerance. It's where the immune system loses the ability to distinguish between a foreign object, like mold or mycotoxins that result from that mold, or your body's own tissue. Okay, so if you have a situation where you have mold colonization in the gut, or you have mycotoxicosis, you have mycotoxins accumulating in your tissue, well, those factors are going to drive a lot of inflammation and a lot of oxidative stress, and also intestinal permeability. They're also going to damage the liver and the kidneys. There's a lot of ways that mold and mycotoxins disrupt function. Starting with just that inflammatory piece alone, chronic inflammation is a major driver, or yeah, that would be the best word I'm looking for, just a driver of autoimmunity. Believe it or not, just being in a chronic inflammatory state is one of the biggest predisposing risk factors for autoimmunity. Okay, you don't get much more inflammatory than mold toxins. They're some of the most inflammatory chemicals on the planet. Okay, so they're bound to disrupt thyroid dysfunction that way. As I'm thinking this through, I would imagine it's possible, because I know that there's studies showing that mercury can accumulate literally in the thyroid gland. I wouldn't see at all why, I haven't seen specific literature on this, but I wouldn't see at all why mycotoxins would not be able to actually accumulate in the thyroid tissue. And so if that is true, if that were the case, then you could easily see a situation where the immune system starts bringing in neutrophils and lymphocytes and all these immune cells and cytokines, like inflammatory signaling molecules, to start to try to neutralize or address the toxins inside the thyroid gland. But as a result, that thyroid gets caught in the crossfire. So in the autoimmune world, we call this the bystander effect. It's like friendly fire, which is not so friendly, by the way. But your immune system is firing chemical bullets, so to speak, at these mycotoxins in your thyroid to try to get rid of them or neutralize them. But as a result, your thyroid tissue just starts getting damaged. You get physical destruction of the thyroid tissue and scarring and that sort of thing, which happens with Hashimoto's, right? There are known hormonal disruptions that occur with thyroid dysfunction. I know Dr. Richie Shoemaker talks about like melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, being disrupted with mold. Leptin is often disrupted with mold. So leptin resistance is a common phenomenon that happens with mold illness. That's why a lot of people with mold-related illness end up gaining weight, because of the leptin resistance.
It's one of the only.
And that
I'm
has
going
a
to cut
lot.
you off. That's one of the only times in my life I gained excess fat was with mold. It is
See,
impossible for me to
yeah,
do that normally.
yeah. There you go. There you go. Yeah. So like you said, Evan, you ready for another hour-long presentation because truly there are so many multiple means or vectors through which mold can disrupt thyroid dysfunction that you can end up getting so lost in that you forget to actually just deal with the problem, right? Which mold is always first and foremost an environmental issue. If you're being affected by mold, it means that there's very likely a water damage issue in your home. And that's the thing, that's really where you need to focus most of your mental effort, energy, and attention. Just remediating the mold, or in some severe cases, relocating when necessary. Truly, that's sometimes half the battle or more. Just getting out of that environment and putting yourself in an environment that's more conducive to healing. I'm saying this because I personally wasted a couple years doing a lot of protocols for mold while I was living in a very, very moldy home. And in hindsight, I would have slapped myself silly a little bit in the face. I would have said, "So what are you doing, Ryan? If I can go in a time machine, just get the hell out of here." Mold is sort of like a biochemical house fire. And the meme where the dog is sitting in the kitchen and the kitchen's
I know
on
exactly.
fire and he's like, "This is fine," right? That's sort of what it's like when you're living in extreme mold, and all the supplements and protocols and detox in the world, when your house is on fire, they're not going to fix the issue. So I know that's a little bit slightly off topic from the question, but
That's right.
yeah,
Thank you.
but that at least gives you some idea.
Well, and I will say this too every time this comes up, is I want people to know this. So remember, guys, I shouldn't say remember, maybe you don't know. In America, at least, I can't speak for other countries. In every single state except Arkansas, if you are renting, you do have unique rights as a renter. They do vary depending on the state that you're in. So use ChatGPT or consult a lawyer or whatever. It's probably cheaper than remediating. And in a lot of those cases, you do have a legal right to get out of the place that you're living.
Yeah.
Or they have to remove the mold themselves. Again, this is obviously if you are renting. So if you're one of our younger FDNs and you're in an apartment, if you're in a life transition and you're in an apartment or townhouse, in those cases, especially if the mold is bad, you do have a very real case to get on out of there. Now, what's sad is I have heard a lot of the times people are able to get out, Ryan, and nothing's really done about it, right? They know nothing's done for the next tenant. It's more just like, okay, yeah, you're free from your lease here. So I don't know if you guys want to be like little vigilantes, and maybe you leave a secret note on the door for the next person that there's mold. I don't know if there's any legal issues with that, so that is up to you and your discretion if you choose to do it. But in every state except Arkansas, renters have at least some rights when it comes to mold. So please remember that if you are renting, tell your friends.
Great
Okay.
advice. I appreciate you sharing that, Evan.
Yeah, sure. I learned that from Jason Earl with Got Mold, and then his friend Mike Feldstein. Actually, Mike Feldstein of Jasper is kind of interesting. He's how there's kind of mold to some degree in every environment. It's just a lot in certain ones. He basically made a joke, kind of a joke, and said, "Hey, if you guys ever want to get out of your lease, just call me because I can pretty much find it with the right test." And he was speaking kind of tongue in cheek, but that just shows how much is in our environment, and then it does get more extreme for certain people. It also affects certain people differently. Maddie, my wife, and I were living in a moldy apartment for a year. I watched myself get sicker and sicker. She had some basic allergies at worst and was overall fine. Like, it's kind of weird how it can affect people differently. So moving on to the next one here. Someone had asked, when you're talking about hypoxia, can hypoxia drive cancer?
Well, it's definitely not an ideal scenario to not have oxygen delivered to your cells. So regardless if it causes cancer or not, it's something that needs to be fixed and restored, right? I'm definitely not a cancer expert. I'm more of an autoimmune guy. That's kind of been my primary area of interest and niche for 10 years. So I don't want to make up some answer. But again, I would imagine it's not helping anything, right? I don't mean to make light of it because it's a serious issue. I'm just trying to rack my brain. See, what I do know is glycolysis unlike the Krebs cycle or the electron transport chain, that glycolysis, the utilization of glucose for energy, does not require oxygen. That's an anaerobic process. Only the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, the latter being where we make most of our ATP, 90 to 95% of our ATP, are generated through that final third step of oxidative phosphorylation. If I know there is what is called the Wahlberg effect. I'm a little out of my depth
Otto
here.
Wahlberg.
Yeah, am I right there, Evan?
It might be Otto Warburg. Let me double check that. But
Yeah,
I know.
I know that's an issue where cancer cells kind of hijack glycolysis. Is sort
Warburg,
of the way
and he won a Nobel Prize.
that you won a Nobel Prize. So I'm a little bit on the mark there, at least. And so I know, roughly speaking, that's an issue where with cancer cells, it's disrupting glycolysis and causing that glycolysis to sort of go on overdrive. And where those cancer cells are feeding off of sugar. And this is why ketogenic diets are really popular for cancer. At least I know that much. With the idea that you can starve the cancer by eliminating sugars, especially added sugars, processed sugars, that sort of thing, from the diet. So you're kind of depriving their fuel source. I'm sure there's some mechanism, maybe with hypoxia in cancer. I'm just not aware of it off the top of my head, though.
Thanks, sir.
Yeah.
All right, what do we got next here? Someone said, good afternoon, feed. Thank you for the informative case. How do you implement iodine with high antibodies? Yeah. So there's two questions here. We will start with that one. And then obviously, just to make a whole clear statement here, all of the things that are said are Ryan's opinion. He's expressing things that he would do for himself personally. This is not medical advice of what you should do, just to make that abundantly clear. So what do you think about this one?
Well, and that especially applies with iodine, because the shortest answer is it's highly bio-individual. Some people do tend to respond very well to it. Some people do not respond too well to it. And I have some theories or reasons as to why I believe that's the case. I'm happy to go into that briefly here in just a second. But ideally, like in my own practice, I like to test for iodine. Our whole thing is test, don't guess. Now, just to be clear here, iodine testing, it's not something we learn about in the FDN course. It's not something that probably most FDNs even do. But I just want everyone to bear in mind, my niche is very specifically in the world of thyroid health and Hashimoto's, where iodine is of special concern or special interest. So within my niche, iodine is actually something that I look at very closely, where I've read a ton of research about iodine. So I like to do what's called iodine loading testing. And that's where you take an iodine tablet and then you measure all of your urine for 24 hours to see how much of that iodine is being recovered in the urine. The higher the percentage on that test, the better. Now, in my experience, most of my clients with thyroid complications, I've actually never once, ever, one time seen any of them have sufficient, optimal, ideal iodine levels on that iodine loading test, which is really, including myself when I first ran it, by the way, because I always start with myself as sort of a guinea pig. So that sort of tells you something, right? Now, obviously, probably a lot of you here are aware that iodine is somewhat of a controversial topic. Even in the functional medicine world, this sort of consensus view, I won't name names, but the consensus viewpoint, again, even in the holistic world, is very often to avoid iodine. And that this idea that iodine can sort of cause like an autoimmune flare, maybe could make your Hashimoto's, your Graves worse, and that sort of thing. I have a lot to say about that. I'm just one person, keep that in mind, but I don't necessarily agree with that viewpoint. I'm mostly in the pro-iodine camp. Even in my own personal health journey, I started supplementing with iodine in 2019 after testing and verifying my levels, and never saw any kind of issues with a thyroid flare-up, never saw my thyroid numbers go wonky or bizarre. In fact, I only ever saw my thyroid antibodies continue to decline. And I have the receipts. I have the lab work to prove and back that up. Okay.
He really does.
I really do. Actually, over 42 thyroid panels to be exact, which is kind of insane. I realize that, but that's welcome to my brain. And so, yeah, I don't know how much deeper I should go other than because there's so much to say about it other than I never have anyone supplement without testing. And even when I do, we start very low. We use the right cofactor so that the body can utilize it properly. So one thing I'll add quickly, one reason I believe that many people do not do with iodine and why it sometimes gets a bad rap. If you write this down after our Q&A today, go on to Google, type in periodic table of elements, just like the one you learn in high school. And if you look at that periodic table, column 17, that family of elements is referred to as halogens. They're called halogens. So in that column, you will see not only iodine, but you'll see fluoride, you'll see chloride or chlorine, you'll see bromide as well. All right, so collectively, these are very biochemically similar, these halogens. They're very biochemically similar to iodine, where I mentioned this very quickly in passing on the earlier slide, but iodine enters your thyroid through something called the sodium iodine symporter, NIS. And if your body is jacked up or loaded up on these other halogens like bromide, chlorine, fluoride, these halogens block the NIS receptors in the thyroid where iodine would normally get in. Okay. So it's disrupting iodine absorption and function. So, all right, then you start supplementing with iodine to a thyroid environment that's already halide toxic, and you start supplementing with iodine, and you start detoxing these other halogens, the bromide, the fluoride, right? And so you're detoxing halogens. You have these bad detox reactions, and so you blame it possibly unfairly on the iodine, where the problem wasn't the iodine, the problem was that you're halide toxic, okay? So that's all the more reason why, and I think when people have an adverse reaction to iodine, it's usually they're doing too much too fast, and they don't have the right cofactors in place. That's really important, having the right cofactors in place so your body could properly utilize the iodine and also help you detox these halogens out of your system that we get, we accumulate from air, food, and water. Bromides are used as flame retardants in furniture. We're surrounded by these things. They used to use bromide in Mountain Dew for years. It was only recently banned. But look that up. That's not made up. There used to be bromide in Mountain Dew, allegedly as like a preservative or something. I'm not exactly sure why. So yeah, not trying to get conspiratorial or anything like this on a Tuesday. That's not the goal. But I think I guess I would summarize my view on iodine is it's not iodine that's the problem. It's how we use it, and it should be used very responsibly because it's a powerful agent. It's very purifying and detoxifying. If we use too much too fast, we may have problems.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah.
Oh, and okay. Well, here, we'll cover that second question in a moment, I promise. So if you guys have just tuned on, welcome. I know that we are starting our trainee study hour in a bit. We purposely left some more time for that because the trainee study hour is under an hour. So we left that slot up because I figured we might go over for Q&A here. So Ryan, we will, if you're down to hang out for a little bit, we can still get through some questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for giving us your time. So then another question, do you work with NDT and what specifics about it? Thank you, which if I'm not mistaken off the top of my head is natural desiccated thyroid, I think.
A+, my friend. You get a gold star. Yeah.
Sometimes I get it right.
Now, do I work with it? No. So FDNs are not prescribing physicians. So I've been an FDN for 10 years, but still to this day, I do not have the ability to prescribe. It would also technically be out of scope of practice for FDNs to even make recommendations to clients about what medications they should get on or get off of, or if they should make a change to their medication. Just to be clear, that is completely off limits for what FDNs do, as FDNs are more allied practitioners, where, in a context with a client, if I was seeing what I felt like might suggest a need for something like an NDT, I'm happy to bring that up in conversation, to have them work more closely with their doctor or their naturopath or prescribing physician to get on a thyroid medication if they think they need one. And I'm happy to do that. Now, that being said, I can speak to my own experience. I've been on an NDT for close to 10 years. And so I have found, as many of my clients have found, that they do better on an NDT, which they're porcine derived. They more closely mirror the ratios of thyroid hormone in the human body from T4 to T3. So there's definitely, in my opinion, an advantage with an NDT in that they also contain T3, whereas something like Synthroid or levothyroxine, which, by the way, at one point, I think in 2020, it was the number one most prescribed drug in America was Synthroid. Okay. Well, the problem with Synthroid is it's T4 only. It does not contain any T3. Remember, I've mentioned several times, T3 is the good stuff. That's the accelerator pedal for our entire metabolism. Now, if your body's really good at converting T4 into T3, you might do okay with Synthroid, to be fair. But a lot of people we work with, they've got liver stress, liver dysfunction, or kidney stress or kidney dysfunction. They're not converting their T4 into T3 very well. Actually, one recent, I'm always learning, like Evan said at the beginning, a research paper I read about 2 weeks ago, I can't believe I never came across this. It's suggested that insulin resistance impairs the conversion of T4 into T3. Insulin resistance impairs or inhibits the conversion of T4 into T3. What? Okay, so how many people have insulin resistance in the United States? I know it's about a third of Americans now are estimated to be obese. Evan, does that sound about right? You're really good.
Yeah, I know it's 70% are overweight or obese. I forget what the exact amount is for the obesity, but I guess that wasn't particularly surprising to me. And the only reason why is because if you look at something like levothyroxine being prescribed as one of the top medications, well, what else is one of the top prescribed medications, right? This whole thing with diabetes. I mean, correlation is not causation, but if the shoe fits, that seems like it's fitting pretty snug.
Yeah, so wild, right? I mean, if you're taking Synthroid and it's T4 only, and you're diabetic or you have metabolic syndrome or you're insulin resistant, then you're not going to be converting that T4 into T3 very well. And that's a large subset of people. Because keep in mind also, just by virtue of being hypothyroid, that is another risk factor for having blood sugar issues and insulin resistant issues. So, I can't tell you guys how many times I've had clients on Synthroid and they feel good for a period of time, like a honeymoon period, but then their symptoms just kind of revert back to where they were when they started. And that's where, in my opinion, again, I'm not a prescribing practitioner, neither is Evan, but I do tend to have a bias towards believing that NTTs like Armor or NP Thyroid are going to work better for most people because they have the T3 in it.
Yep. Oh, this is going to get myself in trouble. Russ, are you suggesting that it's a separate stream because they were supposed to set it up as one? So that is no bueno if that's the case. And I'm really fried if so. So let me know, Russ. We'll go through one more here for right now. Hopefully that's not as bad as I thought. Okay, I've heard that many people who have low iron actually have issues with iron being improperly stored and locked in the body and then utilized incorrectly or not at all. Have you encountered this before?
I think what the question is alluding to, if I were to guess, is the work from Morley Robbins in his book, Cure Your Fatigue. So Morley is like the copper guy. If you don't know about Morley Robbins, he's an expert on copper and how copper interacts with the mitochondria, the electron transport chain, to ultimately help us to produce energy, to produce ATP. So Morley Robbins maybe has read more about copper than anyone else in the world. I think that's kind of his claim to fame. So the question was about iron. Why am I talking about copper? Well, the way Morley describes it in his book is that there's a close relationship between copper and iron. And we know that most iron in the body, I think about 70% of iron, at any given time, it should be in our blood in the form of hemoglobin, right? Like we talked about, carrying oxygen around the body. So if you're lacking in copper, let's say you're deficient in copper, what can happen is iron can start to build up in your cells, in your tissue, where it doesn't belong. Again, most iron should exist in the bloodstream, but without copper present, iron can start to build up in the cells. And when that happens, iron can contribute to a lot of oxidative stress. Iron can interact with that oxygen in the cell and cause like rusting, basically. Think about what is rust. It's iron oxide. It's iron interacting with oxygen. It's creating this oxidative stress in the form of rust. So the question was, can someone with low iron have issues with iron being improperly stored in the body and then utilized correctly? Not at all. I would look, Angelique, if you're interested, I would look at that book, Cure Your Fatigue, because he gets very into depth about this relationship with copper and iron and how copper and iron interact with each other, how they're stored, how copper allows iron to stay in the bloodstream where it belongs, and prevent it from building up in the cell and creating problems. So it's a fascinating book, maybe one of my top 5 actually in terms of all the health-related books I've ever read. So it's a little bit of a slightly challenging read, but really, really rewarding because he gets deep into this stuff.
Guys, I'm so sorry, and this is probably messed up now anyway, but this was all supposed to be one stream. I don't know why it's not. So that means my trainee study hour, Ryan, I was supposed to literally start that 18 minutes ago on something else, and I'm extremely sorry about that. So I'm going to have to cut off the questions now. Guys, I'm going to just give you guys 10, 20 seconds while you're doing something else, maybe just to take a picture of this, reach out to Ryan on Instagram. He's very active. He'd love to answer your questions. He'd love to work with you guys. Okay, cool. I'll leave this up for like 30 seconds so that you can get the functional fast track thing. And is there a direct link for those that might be watching on their phone by any chance? We can put it in the chat or something.
I can grab that right now.
Thank you. We'll do
there's
that.
a QR code there, but if anyone wanted to book a call that was interested in doing a deep dive clinical mentorship, it's one-on-one. It's very personalized. It's not a group program, so I only have limited slots. That's just the truth and the reality of it. But I am taking on another cohort here now as we're heading into the holidays because I had just a few that kind of graduated from the program. And so I'm looking to see where I can drop that booking scheduling link.
Just directly in the chat, or if you do the private chat, I can copy and paste it for you.
Yeah, so let's do that because I can't seem to access the public chat, but this is a link to book a 30-minute call. Again, and the purpose of that would be to learn more about this functional fast track, to see if you'd be a good candidate for it, to learn more about what it's all about. And you're welcome to learn more about it by scanning the QR code. That'll take you to the website. You could see video testimonials and read more about it.
Yeah, and guys, I'm sorry. I don't want this to be messy. Again, I do have to hop over to this trainee study hour. And if you guys want to see that, what that is the Friday call that Reed, Elizabeth, and Kurt do every single Friday for the trainees only. So this is something that you guys will be able to get access to. Again, if you have some follow-up questions from this that didn't get answered, I apologize. That's, I guess, on me. Just go to Ryan's Instagram and ask him there. Remember, though, the 30-minute call is for people specifically interested in working with him directly. Just please respect that and don't use that as an open Q&A forum.
Yes.
If for whatever reason you guys are like, I can't do the link and I'm having trouble because I can't do the QR code because I'm on my phone, very simple. Just be on our YouTube channel. on the live thing, you can go right back to this video on your computer and you can scan the QR code there. So it's not going to disappear. It's automatically available the second that I end this. Actually, technically, you could even just pause it on your computer and rewind it. So you will have it. And I'm sorry, Ryan, for rushing us off here. I thought we were,
Oh,
we were
we're
good on
fine.
time,
I thought we were over anyway, so I'm good, and I appreciate you having me on. And thanks for everyone who hung out to the end and bearing with me while I'm still getting over the flu.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you.